Foreign Secretary is with us now. Mr. Raab, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Calling in the army, what's all that about?
That we're taking a series of targeted, proportionate focus steps because although we've made huge progress since the peak of the virus in March, we can see that uptick and we need to control it, the virus. The reality is there will be stronger enforcement, more powers for the police, higher levels of fines, mainly for the small minority who haven't complied always with the rules. We don't want them to blow it for the vast majority of people and end up in a second lockdown. The issue with the army is, as throughout this pandemic, they've been used to backfill or to support, for example, local authorities with testing, delivery of PPE, and if they can relieve any capacity for the police to do the very difficult job that they've done incredibly well, they'll be there to do that.
Okay, so not on the streets, as it were.
I think the suggestion being put around by John Ashworth that they're going to be out patrolling is, frankly, scaremongering.
Okay. It does look as though this, I don't know if you saw the latest YouGov poll, the SNAP poll that was out last night. The public supports the new COVID restrictions, but almost half think that they don't go far enough. Also, the devolved nations don't think that they go far enough. What else is in the arsenal?
Well, we've always said we've got a sort of repository of measures, as you said, in the arsenal to take. I don't think we're going to speculate about what further could be done, but the reality is they will be more intrusive. We could end up in a national lockdown. That's what we want to avoid. So for those that are saying we're going too far, what I would say is we've made progress with the virus. As with other countries, we've seen an uptick. We want to control it as we go through the winter months, which we know are higher risk. We've got the measures that the scientists have advised that we can take, and let's hope that we can get through the winter months if we take these measures, if everyone plays by the rules, and we go into Christmas not needing to go into that national lockdown with all the impact on society and families, but also the damage it would do to businesses. So our approach is focused, balanced and proportionate.
OK, so a second lockdown is still on the cards, though, a national lockdown?
No, we're taking these measures precisely to act at the stitch in time saves nine.
That's what you're saying.
Well, we can't rule it out. What we want to do is take every effort to avoid that, and that's why we're taking the measures now. Some people will say we'll have the Goldilocks criticisms, too hard, too soft. We looked at this very carefully. We do think, though, now, and as you say, the public back it, taking early preventative measures to make sure we get a grip back of the virus, to make sure it doesn't expand, to lose the sacrifices, the gains that we've made in relation to the virus. And obviously, we rule nothing out for the future. But I'm confident that if everyone follows the new guidance consistently, as the overwhelming majority have, but not everyone, but if everyone now pulls together, as we saw at the peak of the virus, we'll get through these winter months and there's light at the end of the tunnel as we go into next year.
The Prime Minister, in his recorded address to the four nations last night, said that we have succeeded before. One wonders how one of the world's worst death tolls can be seen as success.
Well, we've succeeded in getting grip of this deadly virus. We've protected.
Have we?
We've come through that major peak. If you look at the hospitalisation rate, the fatality rate, we've got that right down. But we don't want to see an uptick in the number of cases lead to that trajectory going back up. And I think we've got now the measures in place to make sure we don't lose the sacrifices, we don't lose the gains that we've made. And we've also got schools open, we've got businesses open, we've got the hospitality sector open. Yes, people will bristle a little bit about these extra restrictions, the 10 p.m. limit on bars and restaurants, but that's in order that we can bank the gains we've made, move forward in a sure-footed and safe and responsible way, not end up in a second lockdown.
I'm glad you mentioned the pubs that are closing at 10. I mean, focusing on the hospitality industry, of the new cases, 729, according to Public Health England, up to the week 13th of September, 45% of cases in care homes, 21% in schools, 18% in workplaces, 5% in pubs and restaurants and other food outlets.
Well, we've seen not...
We're in the wrong direction, aren't we?
No,
at the wrong people.
No, you're certainly right to say that those at greatest risk are the elderly and those in care homes and those with vulnerabilities. We've taken the measures around care homes and the intra-hospital infections that we saw at the peak, those problems. Well, of course, we're looking very carefully at all of that now. But we also know the evidence from, for example, the local lockdowns we had in the northeast, in the Midlands, in the northwest. We've seen internationally, if you take Belgium, that there is an increase in young people spreading the virus. We know that in bars and restaurants, particularly after people have had a few drinks, as you go into the later hours of the evening, that there's a risk that the compliance with the guidance ebbs a little bit. So we're taking this measure. We're confident, based on the evidence we've got domestically, internationally, that it's one element of those that we need to make. But there's no silver bullet here, Kay, and we are deriving different lessons from different aspects of the evidence and indeed the international practice.
Yeah, but 5% of cases were from food outlets, and that does include pubs and restaurants.
Well, I'm not sure quite the data you've got. I trust it. I know you're reading it out faithfully, but we're looking at the whole range of evidence that we've got, including where there's been upticks in the virus in the localised areas, how we got back control over the virus there, and also international experience, particularly on the continent, where they've had this uptick before us. So we know that, for example, the limits on restaurants and bars in Belgium, one element of what they did was quite successful in that respect. But it's only one element in the toolkit, the arsenal that you described, that we're taking.
OK. What about people who were told that you wanted them to go back to work? You wanted 80% of Whitehall staff to be back at work by the end of this month. That has dramatically and drastically changed, and the impact on residual businesses like, I don't know, let's use Pret as an example,
yeah.
And I don't know, dry cleaners, etc., where the footfall is just passing footfall, they're done, they're toast.
Do you know, I was at my local dry cleaners in Hersham asking about this. I totally get those sectors that have really struggled through this and will feel that the change in guidance is another blow to them. We understand that. But we are taking these measures. I do think it's important. You're right, there's a change in the guidance. We're following the evidence. We want to keep the uptick that we've seen in the number of cases and bear down on it, keep that under control, bear down on it. And better that we take these measures now than we end up in a wholesale lockdown where those businesses can't operate at all, whether it's in the hospitality sector, the entertainment sector, or indeed in retail.
So there'll be money to help these businesses, will there?
There's been a huge amount, £160 billion.
Yeah, but will there be more money to help them?
We're always looking. The Chancellor's put a huge amount in place. I know, looking at my high streets, I've been out in all of them talking to retail, that they've really benefited from the bounce back loans, from the grants, from the exemption from business rates. But the Chancellor's keeping all of that under constant review, not just economy-wide, but the specific sectors affected.
Including extending furlough?
Well, we've saved 12 million jobs. We've got the job retention bonus, the Kickstart scheme. So
for now.
We're looking at that, but I don't think the Chancellor's minded to wholesale extend the furlough scheme. We are looking at the targeted measures. We keep them constantly under review, and we've done a great job keeping those jobs and those businesses alive through the peak of the crisis. And of course, we want to keep afloat as many of them as possible. And I know that's at the forefront of the Chancellor's considerations with the future budgets and CSR spending review in mind.
What about with the aviation industry? I mean, one way to fix that without offering them any money is to improve the testing system. There has been a campaign via, I think, the Daily Telegraph newspaper, where the former Prime Minister, even the former Prime Minister, said that you should improve testing at airports, or indeed put testing in at airports, and we don't. Why not?
The challenge is that the false positive rate is very high. So only 7% of tests will be successful in identifying those that actually have the virus. So the truth is, you can't just rely on that. And in fairness, I don't think those advocating it think that you can. You'd still have to rely on the self-isolation at home and have further testing
5
there.
5 days later, but why not do that?
Well, actually, that's what we have. We have self-isolation at home, and we want to make sure we ramp up the testing capacity to alleviate that and other measures. But the truth is, with test and trace, and there'll be, you know, we've made huge gains over the last few months. We are prioritising key workers on the front line, NHS workers, care home workers. We've got our testing rate per capita is ahead of any other major country, ahead of all the other European countries. But we do have to look at what we're prioritising and what's going to be the most effective.
Let's canter through another couple of points. I know that your time is tight. What's going on with football grounds? 1st of October, large sporting events won't be able to go ahead as planned. What happens if people want to go and watch their football game?
Well, look, we've obviously got the Premier League started. We've got grassroots football at amateur level that is proceeding. We're worried about those crowds. We had in place a system of pilots and a phased approach to having crowds back into the big events like Premier League football. We do need to put that on pause, and it's basically around avoiding the kind of transmission amongst large groups of people.
OK. Can I ask you to put your Foreign Secretary hat on for just
Sure.
a couple of questions, if I may? Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yes.
Her place on the Supreme Court will be filled on Saturday.
Yeah.
That does certainly seem to be distastefully quick. Of course, you don't want to get involved in internal politics of another country. But having said that, if Joe Biden wins, he's going to look across the pond and say, why didn't you support us?
Well, actually, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to get drawn into domestic politics, including Supreme Court appointments. But I've been out in Washington. I was there last week. We're obviously very careful not to dip our toe into the febrile waters of the US election, but we've got great relations. I've been talking to Congress, men and women on the Hill, from Republicans to Democrats. We're very confident we'll be a stalwart partner to the US, regardless of who's in office, either in Downing Street or indeed in the Oval Office. That's the nature of the special
Nancy Pelosi doesn't necessarily agree, and Joe Biden agreed with her, saying if we broke the law, when it comes to the Brexit bill, then they won't do a deal with us.
Well, I met Nancy Pelosi, as I met Republicans and,
did she underline that
and Democrats. So I think it's right to say that particularly Democrats in the Irish lobby in Congress are concerned about what's happening with Brexit. In fact, that's been the case right the way through. It's my third meeting with Richie Neal, who represents the Irish caucus. They made their concerns clear. It was also a good opportunity for me to make clear that the UK has absolutely and unconditionally made clear that we will respect the Good Friday Agreement, that we would never erect any infrastructure at the border between the North and the South. And actually, it's the EU that hasn't made that commitment on their side. So I think it was a good opportunity to be clear on where we're standing. But right across Congress, I can tell you, Republicans and Democrats are excited about the opportunity to engage with Britain, particularly on all of our foreign policy agenda, where we're very like-minded.
Can I ask you about Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe? Of course, our viewers will know her husband was in here just last week. She has complained that overnight she's been harassed at home by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Have you heard about it? What are you doing about it?
So, first of all, my heart goes out to Nazanin. I've spoken to her a couple of times over the summer because she's under equivalent of house arrest. We've made it clear right the way through. I've spoken to Foreign Minister Zarif twice during August, and we're continuing to discuss the treatment of Nazanin and also the other dual nationals in detention is arbitrary. They need to be released. They need to be returned home. And in terms of what the most recent thing we've done is I've teamed up with my French and German counterparts. We've démarched the Iranians on human rights, but also specifically the detention of nationals and dual nationals in Iran. We continue to make it clear that the treatment of Nazanin and all of those Brits, dual nationals in particular, is utterly unacceptable.
One of the things that might help is the 400 million quid or thereabouts that we owe the Iranian government. We accept that we owe them that money for tanks pre the revolution back in the late 70s. The Defence Secretary said that we are heading towards paying that. Where are we?
Well, there's been a process that's been ongoing. It's not linked, but it's in parallel, where we've been saying, look, we recognise this debt and we'll look at how we can resolve it as best we can. There are all sorts of challenges to doing that, not least the sanctions regime that is in place, including from the US. But frankly, that isn't an excuse for the Iranians.
But are we thinking about paying it?
We said that we would make steps to resolve it.
When?
Well, when we can. But
what does that mean?
Well, look, there's some litigation that has been ongoing. There's all sorts of logistical challenges in delivering it. But frankly, that is separate from the clear and immediate obligation on the Iranians to not to detain British nationals, including dual nationals, arbitrarily, and not to, as you've described, engage in this cat and mouse exercise with Nazanin in particular. And certainly we've been abundantly clear that it will be beyond the pale for her to be returned to detention at this time.
Quick thought before I let you go. On a personal level, are you worried about the flu vaccine? Are you going to have a flu vaccine this winter?
Yes, absolutely, as soon as possible.
OK. Are you worried about catching
In fact,
COVID?
I'm booked in for one on Friday.
Oh, are you? Maybe I'll have one as well. As a result of that, I'll say the Foreign Secretary says he's having one, so I'm going to have one. Are you worried about catching COVID? Have you had it already?
I haven't had an antibody test, but every time I've had symptoms, I've either self-isolated and then had a test, and so who knows? I mean, before the lockdown in March, back in February, I had some of the symptoms, and you never quite know from the swab test.
You're looking really poorly in the House of Commons.
Yeah. Well, but look, I've been tested a number of times, including when I went to the States, and I'm free of COVID.